Hello and welcome to this online tour of Dublin Castle. My name is Evelyn Suttle and today I'm going to be telling you a bit of the history of the Irish suffragettes. This is very much a condensed tour that hopes to summarise some of the events leading to women's suffrage, which is also known as women's franchise or simply known as votes for women. A lot of the actions carried out by the suffragettes risked their liberty, it risked their livelihoods, their jobs, their financial securities. A lot of the women mentioned today, they come from a background of exceptional privilege rather than from low-income households or minority groups. There are so many more stories and perspectives to be heard from this era. So if you're interested in learning more, please take a look at our other resources, follow our social media, or for a limited number of visitors, you can book tickets to come into the castle on dublincastle.ie. I'm now in the drawing room of Dublin Castle, which was used as a formal living room for the wives of the viceroys, the viceroy being the representation of the British monarch here in Ireland. So Dublin Castle was used as a residence for them. It was also used as the centre of British administration. I'm in front of a painting of a young Queen Victoria, and this is where our story starts. Following the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, in a time known as the Victorian era. This is a time described by Charlotte Despard as removing the work carried out by women in the home to the factory, which would only be carried out and owned by man. A time creating an ideal of a soft, fragile, submissive housewife. Women were not allowed to vote. Women were not allowed to be members of public boards. They were not encouraged to earn their own living. They had fewer opportunities in terms of education, and that led to fewer opportunities in terms of employment. That led to fewer options when it came to marriage and family planning. And so this cycle of inequality seemed unlikely to end without the option of casting a vote for the government. So in 1866, the first mass women's suffrage petition was presented to Parliament. It was debated, it was voted upon by the men in Parliament, and it was defeated. So in the 1870s, new legislation was introduced that would give some women an opportunity in terms of higher education. So that was able to get their foot in the door, and that was thanks to women like Isabella Todd. Isabella Todd set up the first Women's Suffrage Association in Belfast in Ireland in 1871. And 5 years later, the first suffrage association in Dublin was set up by Anna Haslam, who set up the Irish Women's Suffrage and Local Government Association. Now that said, they were carrying out so many campaigns for more petitions, for peacefully canvassing with the politicians, and they hoped to achieve the vote this way. But by the 1900 general election, women still weren't allowed to vote, and so some women decided to take a different approach. I'm now in the gardens of Dublin Castle, in between the state apartments and the coach house on the south side of the castle. And I'd like to turn our attention to the terminology from this time. Suffrage refers to the right to vote. Suffragist refers to someone campaigning for the right to vote, and it's often associated with women of the late 1800s or early 1900s. Suffragette is said to be a term coined by the Daily Mail in 1906 as a patronising term for the women of the Women's Social and Political Union. So the WSPU had been set up in 1903 by the Pankhursts in England with the slogan, "Deeds, not words," and with the attitude that peaceful campaigns and petitions hadn't worked, and so more militant action needed to be taken. And so the term suffragette was soon adopted by the more militant members of this movement. And in 1908, two Irish suffragettes, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington and Margaret Cousins, co-founded an organisation here called the Irish Women's Franchise League with the idea to carry out militant action for the cause here in Ireland. Now, militant can refer to confrontation and violence towards people, but when we refer to suffragettes, generally it's violence towards property, such as planting bombs in empty buildings, arson, telegraph wire cutting, or in some cases digging up golf courses. But that wasn't the case here in Dublin Castle. This was the centre of British administration. It was surrounded by police and security at all times. So they couldn't walk inside, but they were able to access the streets just outside the gates. So that's where our story takes us next. I'm now on Ship Street, just outside Ship Street Gate at the southwest corner of the castle, which leads into the gardens and the coach house. In 1912, the Irish Women's Franchise League decided to carry out a militant action to smash the windows of government buildings. 8 women were involved in total. Some went to the Custom House to smash windows there, and those same women rushed quickly to the GPO on O'Connell Street to smash windows there before they were arrested. This created the idea that there were more people involved in this action than there actually were. Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, co-founder of the Irish Women's Franchise League, arrived here at Ship Street with a stick to smash the windows outside Dublin Castle. She knew she would be quickly apprehended, and a police officer did grab her by one arm, but she still continued to smash more windows with her other arm before she was arrested and taken to prison. Now, that didn't stop the Irish Women's Franchise League. 3 other women, including Margaret Cousins, her co-founder, arrived back at Dublin Castle 7 months later. So in 1913, once again, the windows were smashed of Dublin Castle. And Cousins' husband said that the newspapers reported that the windows of the office of the Prisons Board and the state apartments had been smashed, causing 21 shillings and 8 pence of damage, the equivalent of about €100 today. Now, all cases received the same kind of treatment. They were given between 1 month and 6 months prison sentence, and they were to be treated as ordinary prisoners rather than political prisoners, with the idea that this would hopefully silence their cause. But they actually would continue their protest even from within their prison cells. Before I discuss the treatment of suffragettes in prisons, I'd like to stop briefly here outside Bedford Tower at Dublin Castle, a building that was once used to house and protect the Irish crown jewels until they were mysteriously stolen in 1907, an incident that we still don't know the full story about. When Margaret Cousins smashed the windows of Dublin Castle and was arrested and taken to the police station beside Trinity College, meanwhile, another plan was in place over in England. The crown jewels of the United Kingdom at the time were on display in a case in the Wakefield Tower in London. And a few days after the windows were smashed here, a woman named Leonora Cohen arrived to view the crown jewels on display. Now, this wasn't too unusual. It was seen that she could have been a school teacher, perhaps with a group of students. But no, she was a suffragette with an iron bar hidden under her coat. She used it to smash the glass case surrounding the crown jewels. Now, in order to have this not marked off as just a random act of vandalism, she had a note on the iron bar saying the following: "Votes for women. 100 years of constitutional petition, resolutions, meetings and processions have failed. Jewel House, Tower of London, my protest to the government for its refusal to enfranchise women, but continues to torture women prisoners. Deeds, not words, Leonora Cohen." So not only is she trying to raise awareness for women's suffrage, but she's also trying to raise awareness for the mistreatment of suffragettes in prisons at the time. I'm now in the lower courtyard of Dublin Castle, where the Record Tower is, the oldest part of the castle, an 800-year-old medieval tower. There was a political cartoon in 1913 that depicted 3 women running at this tower, 3 suffragettes, one holding a ladder, one holding an umbrella, and one holding a hatchet. Now, while the political cartoon is not accurate for any one event, there actually is some truth to each aspect of it. Suffragettes were known to attack Dublin Castle. They were known to use ladders to break into buildings. They were known to use umbrellas, sometimes as a form of self-defence, and they were known to use hatchets as well. When Prime Minister Asquith visited Dublin in 1912, 2 suffragettes are said to have thrown a hatchet at him, but they missed, and it's said that the hatchet in fact hit the ear of leader of the Irish political party John Redmond instead. Now, one thing in common that all these actions had is that they were illegal and they were arrestable offences. Suffragettes spending time in prison was not only a risk, but a likelihood in many cases. When they were in prison, they wanted to continue their protest, and so many went on hunger strike. And in England, a lot of suffragettes were force-fed. Now, this process is described in detail by suffragettes like Constance Lytton, a detail that I will not go into today, but she does say that it's a horror that she'll never forget. So when Hannah Sheehy Skeffington and Margaret Cousins were imprisoned for their actions here, they said that they didn't fear starvation, but they did fear the force-feeding process. Margaret Cousins was assured by a local doctor at Tullamore Jail that force-feeding would not be practised here in Ireland. They carried out their hunger strike, and outside, the Irish Women's Franchise League created a petition to pressure the administration at Dublin Castle and to pressure the Viceroy to grant them political prisoner status rather than treating them as ordinary prisoners. The petition with the hunger strike was successful. When the women were released, Margaret Cousins moved to India and began campaigning for women's rights there. Hannah Sheehy Skeffington remained politically active for the rest of her life and ran for general election in 1943 here in Ireland. So at the time, they thought that women's suffrage would be written into the next Home Rule Bill and that would be carried out for a parliament here. But little did they know, the Home Rule Bill would never come into action, and their militant action would end the following year, because a great war was on the horizon at that stage. In 1914, the First World War broke out. The next 4 years would change a lot internationally and locally here in Dublin Castle. The wife of the Viceroy, Ishbel Aberdeen, made the decision that these rooms would be used as part of a Red Cross infirmary to treat wounded soldiers. The suffragettes also changed their attention. Some aided the war effort, some wanted to help the poor at this time, and some turned their attention towards Irish rebellion. Helena Maloney, an Irish Republican woman and editor of Ban na hÉireann, had issues with Irish women mirroring the campaigns of the English suffragette movement. A letter from the editor in Ban na hÉireann in 1908 read the following message about the English suffragettes. They have all our sympathy. They have spent time and energy and risked liberty and suffered hardships and indignities unspeakable. They are in their own country fighting for their rights, but their cause is not ours. The cause of Irish women is in Ireland and must be won in Ireland, not in England or any foreign country. If Irish women have time and energy to use and the will to make sacrifices and risk liberty, let it be for a nobler cause and a greater end than the right to send hostages to England. We object very much to the Irish women's asking permission to vote for an English Parliament, and when we get our own over here, we believe the Irish men will not only give women equal rights of voting, but also equal rights of election. In 1916, during the First World War, the Easter Rising broke out. Just outside the gates of Dublin Castle, Helena Maloney fought in that rebellion. She was arrested and held in Ship Street Barracks. James Connolly, a leader of the rebellion, was injured near O'Connell Street. When they surrendered, he was taken to a hospital bed, and that hospital bed will be in one of the rooms of Dublin Castle. I'm now in one of the smaller rooms of Dublin Castle. Today it's known as the Connolly Room. In 1916, a proclamation was read out by Patrick Pearse on O'Connell Street on Easter Monday. A copy of that proclamation is on the wall in this room today. The first 3 words are Irish men and Irish women. It goes on to say that the Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and that they're looking for a national government representative of the whole people of Ireland and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women. While the 1916 proclamation is praised by the Republic of Ireland today, when the IRB Military Council agreed upon its wording in 1916, Kathleen Clarke recorded that not everyone agreed upon including equal opportunities for women. She said that one disagreed with that being included in the proclamation. She doesn't reveal who it is. She says it's not Thomas Clarke, and most historians will agree that it could not have been James Connolly, who had very progressive views regarding the rights of women and was associated with the Irish Women's Franchise League. When James Connolly was arrested following the rebellion, because he was wounded, he was taken to Dublin Castle to be treated, before being transported to Kilmainham Jail, where he was tied to a chair and executed. The 1916 executions are considered to be the spark that ignited the Irish Revolution and led to the Irish Republic today. But that said, 1916 was far from the end of the fighting. Stopping now in the Chapel Royal of Dublin Castle, I'd like to briefly mention that the history of religious discrimination in Ireland and the power of the Church in Ireland played a huge role in the Irish Revolution, as well as the changing role of women in our society. This Chapel Royal is filled with names of former viceroys. The vast majority of them came from a wealthy English Protestant background, and of course all of them are men. Interestingly, in the mid-1800s, there was no longer any space in the wooden panellings to add more names, and so more names of future viceroys would be added to the stained glass windows. Coincidentally, the windows had exactly the number of spaces for the number of viceroys who remained before the office would be abolished. The second last name appears above me here in the corner beside the organ. It reads John Denton Pinkstone Viscount French, Lord Lieutenant, 11th of May 1918. He very much represented this British administration, but his sister, Charlotte Despard, was wildly different. Charlotte Despard campaigned for votes for women, she campaigned for independence for Ireland, she campaigned for home rule for India, she was an anti-conscription activist, she was an animal rights activist, and in 1898 she actually converted to Catholicism. This wasn't that unusual for a Republican woman to convert to Catholicism, and there are many different factors that could play into this. One of the suggested reasons for Charlotte Despard is that she may have wanted to be part of a religion that would put a woman as a central figure of praise. Following the First World War, when Viscount French was viceroy here, there needed to be a general election, and it was agreed upon that there needed to be an election that would allow everyone who fought for and worked for their country to vote for its government. And so in 1918, the Representation of the People Act was introduced. This was a huge step. It allowed all men over the age of 21 to cast a vote, and it allowed some women over the age of 30, if they qualified in terms of property ownership, to cast a vote. Now, needless to say, this was not equal rights of voting. This is not exactly what the suffragettes had fought for. But it did allow some women to cast a vote, and some women were able to run for Parliament. Charlotte Despard ran in the general election of 1918 with 16 other women. She didn't win her seat, but one woman did. A woman who was associated with Charlotte Despard, with Helena Maloney, with Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, and James Connolly. The one woman elected in 1918 once visited here in Dublin Castle, and there's actually a painting that features her in the castle today. So we're going to move on to that now. I'm now in St. Patrick's Hall of Dublin Castle, which was once used as a ballroom, but also once there was a visitor here named Constance Markievicz. Constance Markievicz is well known as the first woman elected to British Parliament in 1918. But that's not the only remarkable thing about her election. She was an Irish Republican woman who was actually still in prison at the time and had been sentenced to death for her rebellious actions. She was elected to British Parliament, but she refused to go. She campaigned for Irish independence instead. And following the Irish War of Independence in 1922, Dublin Castle was handed over to the provisional government of the Irish Free State, with a constitution that would allow women in the nation to vote at the same age as men from that point onward. That was in 1922, less than 100 years ago. So many steps had to be taken after that in order to campaign for gender equality, which are still going on today. On the 25th of January 2020, the first Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality met here in St. Patrick's Hall to discuss many issues today, such as women's role in childcare, in the workforce, and LGBT+ rights. In that way, we hope to look to the past in order to learn how we can take action today to create a better future for everyone living in Ireland. If you would like to learn more about Dublin Castle or about these stories, please follow our social media or go to dublincastle.ie to book a ticket. Thank you for watching this online tour.